Welcome to the Premier Living Podcast, where we break down the science behind the supplements and highlight the team driving innovation at Premier Research Labs. Before we begin, please note, the statements made in this podcast have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. Our products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This content is intended for educational use by health professionals. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Premier Living Podcast, where we break down the science behind the supplements and spotlight the team behind the mission. I'm Jessenia Rosado, PRL's Quality Systems Manager, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing our Research and Development Manager, Nathan Dodge. We're going deep into one of our most requested topics, detoxification, specifically how PRL approaches detox product development from a scientific perspective. Let's start foundational. When we talk about detox at PRL, what exactly do we mean?
So when we talk about detox, I think first we need to understand what toxins are. So there are obviously chemical or physical toxins that we're exposed to on a daily basis, but there are also other environmental toxins that could be light and sound, anything essentially that we would perceive with our senses. And so we need to really look at toxins as anything that's deleterious or negatively impacts the body. So detoxification is essentially the way of eliminating those or minimizing exposure so that you don't have repeated injury, insult, and obviously it does not affect the body negatively.
How is PRL's approach to detoxification different from what we see in mainstream or fad detox programs?
Well, so again, I think we'll focus today on the physical detox, and so the idea of chemical detox, because really that becomes the major point here, and that's what most people think of when they think detox. And in mainstream detox, what you see mostly acute detox, meaning something that is taken for a very short period of time that's meant to eliminate toxins from the body incredibly quickly, or at least supposedly do so, and then a person is somehow back to perfect health and can continue doing what they normally do and be exposed to those toxins again, and then essentially have to just repeat the whole process over and over and over again. At PRL, we really do like the holistic approach. We want to try to see how we can detox the body in a more efficient manner, but also prevent that repeated injury, that repeated exposure that continues to cause damage. So sometimes we think of the long-term effects of detox and we say, well, if we're going to go on an acute detox method or regimen, what are going to be the long-term effects of doing that over and over again? Is there a way to do it maybe more slowly, more controlled over a longer term, but which would have less negative effects on the body because it isn't such a major impact all at once? And so most of the products that PRL uses are meant for detox, but they're meant for a slightly longer term regimen of a detox.
Nice. Well, let's talk about one of our products, Mediclay. Mediclay FX. What makes this clay different from others on the market, and how does it function as a binder?
So Mediclay is a really interesting product. So the clay that we use is actually a patented clay. Okay, so it's a bentonite clay. It's calcium bentonite clay, but it's produced under a controlled process. It's a patented process, actually made in Texas, believe it or not. And through this process, the clay itself is essentially broken down into nanoparticles. These particles, because as you know, if you break down a larger structure to smaller and smaller pieces, you actually expose more surface area. Right. And it's the surface area that's really what's necessary for the adsorptive properties of the clay. So by breaking this down so small, you now have a massive, massive amount of available surface area to absorb toxins. And there are actually a number of controlled studies on the clay that we use that shows that it can actually reduce the amount of absorption in the body of aflatoxins taken in by the diet. And then, of course, there's also the studies that show that the clay can bind to things like heavy metals in the gut as well. And really, when we talk about detox, I think it's important to consider that there are multiple systems involved in detoxification in the body. Detoxification happens essentially at all levels, all the way down to individual cells. Cells have mechanisms for removing toxins from them. But if you look at the organ systems, most people, again, just think of detox as being something for the digestive system, and primarily they just think the liver. But you really do have to look at the fact that other body systems are going to eliminate. One of the major systems of elimination is the integumentary system, which is the skin. And so when you think about the applications for detoxing through the skin, clays are also used for that as well. But clays are also incredibly good for use in the gut. And really the digestive system in general and its detoxification properties, extend far beyond the liver. What something like a bentonite clay or Armedi clay FX would do is it would actually prevent the very first step, which is essentially the worst step when we talk about the process of becoming toxified, which is it prevents the absorption. So in drug studies, when you look at what pharmaceutical companies do, they do what they call ADME studies. Those are the steps for the absorption, the distribution, the metabolism, and the excretion of a drug compound. And if you really look at all compounds as having any kind of compound you take in your body is going to follow that process. Toxins do the same thing. They have an absorption. That's one of the steps is absorption by the body. So if a clay can bind to that and prevent it from being absorbed, you don't even have to worry about things like how it distributes in the body through various tissues, how your body tries to detoxify it and excrete it, because essentially it won't even be absorbed, so it'll go right along to the point of being excreted.
Nice. Very interesting. And you mentioned the liver right there. So speaking of liver, we also have a liver ND product. With liver ND, why did we choose to ferment liver supportive herbs? What does ND technology bring to the table?
So our founder, Dr. Marshall, was a huge proponent of fermented foods. Mm-hmm. Fermented foods in general, he knew well ahead of his time that fermented foods are better absorbed by the body. Because the fermentation process in general will actually break down larger molecules and make them more easily absorbed in the human digestive tract. That's the principle essentially behind a lot of the fermented foods that we eat. And so the application of the ND technology, the fermentation of the herbs in that process, essentially it's breaking down a larger scale herb physical properties. It's actually breaking down cellulose structures, and it's opening up those structures to be more, again, easily absorbed by the human body, those parts that need to be absorbed at least, but also releasing those chemicals that are useful for us. In particular, obviously, what Liver ND focuses on is milk thistle and turmeric. Both of those herbs have an incredibly long history in use for detoxification. And especially, again, obviously, they're very specific to their properties for benefiting the liver. If you look at something like turmeric and you see sort of what it does, well, obviously, turmeric contains curcuminoids. Curcuminoids are very potent antioxidants. And study after study shows how curcuminoids affect the liver in a very positive manner. The liver really has 3 phases of detoxification that it really, controls, essentially. The first phase is modification. So all the chemicals that go through the liver get modified, essentially, meaning that the body, in order to eliminate chemicals, wants to get them into a water-soluble format. So it will actually typically oxidize a chemical, or it'll attach another molecule that is more water-soluble to that molecule to make it better able to be essentially eliminated from the body. The second phase of detox is conjugation. So in that phase, the liver attaches very specific molecules to these now modified compounds to help get them out of the body faster. One of the ones that you'll see frequently is glutathione. Glutathione sometimes is called the master antioxidant, but it isn't just an antioxidant. It also is something that gets conjugated to these compounds, which allows them to then be excreted through the bile and out into the elimination tract, essentially through the colon and out of body. So all of these compounds essentially that you see, coming out of things like turmeric, they're meant to benefit the phase 1 and phase 2 steps of detoxification. So curcuminoids typically are very strong antioxidants. So they will protect the liver in terms of reducing the amount of reactive oxygen species that could be damaging the liver during the detoxification phases. In particular, they actually have a protective effect on the enzymes involved in phase 1, so that very first phase where you're modifying the toxins. And then also, obviously, it also supports, by preventing this massive buildup of reactive oxygen species, you don't deplete your glutathione, which then needs to be used in phase 2 as a conjugate. So that's where the curcuminoids come in. Milk thistle has almost an entirely separate mechanism of action. It has a compound in it called silymarin. And silymarin also, again, is antioxidant, has high antioxidant potential, so it does work in that respect as well. But silymarin also shows in clinical studies, and this is very well established, the ability to actually help regenerate hepatic cells. So in the course of phase 1 and 2 elimination in the liver is undergoing injury as well, especially dependent on the type of chemicals it's being exposed to. Some of them, even despite the fact that the liver is able to detoxify them, they still have toxic effects. And in some cases, during modification, they may even become more toxic. So they still are damaging the liver. What the milk thistle does, then the silymarin compound in milk thistle, is it actually has been shown to repair the hepatic cells and increase production of hepatic cells. So it really is doing this sort of back-end duty, if you will, of rebuilding the liver after the detoxification process. It's a really, really interesting thing.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for elaborating on the liver ND. We have another of our detoxifying products, the hepatoven. The hepatoven is often used in foundational liver support protocols. What went into selecting the ingredients for this formula?
So again, hepatoven leans very heavily on one of those same compounds that we see in the liver ND, which is, in this case, it's an extract from milk thistle. So it's actually a very highly concentrated form of the silymarin that I just talked about. And again, with all of the clinical evidence behind it, for liver repair, for the antioxidant status that it has, silymarin is really, when we say foundational for the liver and liver health, silymarin is one of those things that I personally don't think we could do without. In today's world, we're exposed to so many toxins. Let's not even think about the consumption of things like alcohol, for example, which many people do. Alcohol, obviously, as everyone knows, has incredibly deleterious effects on the liver. But think about the other things that we're exposed to on a daily basis that we can't control at all. There's microplastics in everything we eat and drink at this point. There's bisphenols that leach out of plastics. There's all of these compounds that we're essentially assaulting our liver with every day, let alone, again, in our food, things that just over time will accumulate, things like aflatoxins that you see that come from molds in the environment. There's very little food left in the supply, especially in things like herbs or foods that come from areas really near the equator where the conditions are rife for the growth of the aspergillus fungus, which produces these toxins. There's almost no way to get food that doesn't have aflatoxin in it anymore, or at least some form of mycotoxin. So basically what's happening is you're getting exposed to mycotoxins in all the food you eat. And mycotoxins are incredibly dangerous for the liver. In fact, there is direct evidence that they cause liver cancers. So to prevent the damage to the liver, essentially, if you were to take silymarin has been shown to reverse a lot of that damage. And that is really the point in it being a foundational compound for any kind of applications for liver health or in general detoxification, because your body can handle a lot of the detoxification on its own without anything exogenous added. But post that detoxification, if there was enough damage done, how do you repair that? The body has mechanisms to do that, but the silymarin really is there to take that to the next level and help to repair the liver in a much, much, much faster set of time, honestly. So if you can do something like that and you can take a dose of silymarin daily, just think that as long as you're not literally taking this every day for months and months and months, but if you take that over a course of time, it can repair the liver from quite a great deal of damage that has been done over time. Now, in addition to the silymarin that's in our product, hepatoven, there's also artichoke extract. And artichoke extract is interesting in that it has been shown to increase the excretion of bile acids. And these bile acids and these conjugates of bile acids, as I was saying before, phase 2 detox is the conjugation of the toxic molecules, which then can be excreted via these bile acids. So what artichoke does essentially is it helps with that last step of detoxification, the phase 3, which is actually the elimination phase. So actually moving those compounds out of the liver into the alimentary canal and essentially to be excreted, through the colon.
Excellent. One of our practitioners, many of our practitioners are familiar with chlorella. What sets metachlorella effects apart in terms of sourcing, form, and activity from these other products? So probably the most interesting thing about the chlorella we use is that our chlorella has, again, it's a patented form of chlorella, or at least the process for making it is patented. And what it does is it increases the amount of available cell wall in that powder. So once they break down the chlorella, what they've done is they've found a way to make sure that there's a lot of the remaining cell wall from the chlorella, from the actual algae. And it's the cell wall that's involved in the detoxification process, because essentially the cell wall of chlorella is made up mostly of polysaccharides. And these polysaccharides are actually what adhere to heavy metals and toxins and then keep them from being absorbed in the human body. So the more available cell wall you have, the more there is to absorb to these compounds, which then can keep them from being absorbed. So this patented process essentially increases the amount of available cell wall and essentially preserves those polysaccharides so that they don't degrade very quickly. So you're still getting a very, very strong dose, essentially, of the cell wall, which is the useful part of the chlorella for the detoxification process. Now, in addition, you're also getting the chlorophyll from the chlorella. And chlorophyll as well has many effects in terms of being an antioxidant and supporting detoxification then in the liver. So again, this is sort of a biphasic system, if you will. 1, preventing absorption of toxins, and then 2, providing antioxidant support to the actual processes in the liver of detoxification. Nice. So how do you approach formulating a detox product that is both effective and well tolerated?
So again, that's where we have to look at all of these different phases in the what we'll call maybe pharmacokinetic profile. So thinking about toxins in general is one thing. And obviously if you look at them in general and you just say, this is the general idea of toxins, compounds absorbed by the body that can cause dangerous effects or are in some way toxic to an organ system, then you can start from a very general hypothesis on it, which is if I introduce a product that provides support to one of the steps of detoxification or one of those original steps that prevents, say, absorption of a toxin, then that's my first step toward developing a product. So again, there are many things that we can look at, many compounds that we can look at that would be preventive of absorption of toxins. I mean, obviously we've talked about the clay. We've talked about chlorella. There are lots of fibers in the market, and this may be why there's been such an amazing modern push toward the idea of fibers. Not only is fiber great in terms of providing essentially a source of food for the probiotics in your gut, so things we now call prebiotic fiber, but fibers in general, especially insoluble fibers, typically have a very high capacity for adsorbents to absorb many different molecules. But among those, metals, like heavy metals, will be adsorbed to the surface, and other chemicals too that can be toxic. So by increasing your fiber intake in general, not only are you providing yourself with the benefit of feeding your probiotics and increasing the frequency of bowel movement, but you're actually also allowing for the adsorption of toxins to that fiber, which will then just be carried right out of the body and eliminated. So that would be one of the first things we'd look at. And not to jump ahead on you here a little bit, but I'm sure you're going to ask me about future products. And definitely we have our eyes set on a powerful fiber product. So I'm going to keep that off to the side for now. And I'll go on to some more information for you, but I wanted to just leave that out there to say, yes, fiber, very important to this process of detoxification.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna look at some of that later down the road. But there's other things that we look at when we're trying to design a product. So obviously then we start looking at things like the actual steps in the liver of detoxification. So phase one detoxification, very important. Again, this is what we typically call modification. And modification is primarily performed by a set of enzymes that are called cytochromes. The cytochromes, again, they're known incredibly well. I'm sure all of our practitioners know, the various set of them. There's an entire set of them. But they function primarily, again, as enzymes. So to support their enzymatic action, there are things that people really need to take in from their diet to support that, and that's where B vitamins come in incredibly handy. In fact, you would not have proper functioning of your cytochromes without B vitamins. In some cases, the B vitamins actually act as cofactors in those enzymatic reactions. So taking something like our Max B, for example, or our B Complete, helps to support that phase one detox. In addition, because of the fact that this action of the enzymes is so potent, there's the generation of reactive oxygen species. Even in the modification, you may produce something more toxic. Well, having strong antioxidant support is very important there. And so when designing a product for the liver, you need to always look at that. You need to make sure that there is some sort of strong antioxidant profile in the product you're creating, because you want to support that part of the detoxification in the phase one to make sure that, again, you're accounting for generation of these reactive oxygen species or possibly more toxic compounds through that modification process. We also then have to look at phase two, the conjugation step. Now, primarily conjugation occurs, one of the most conjugated molecules or molecule most used for conjugation perhaps is glutathione. And we talk about glutathione all the time here at PRL. Again, they call it the master antioxidant, and it is an incredibly potent antioxidant. But you need to make sure that your body does not deplete its stores of glutathione, hence why taking in antioxidants is so important. You can also take glutathione, and PRL offers a glutathione product for exactly that purpose. We want to support the detoxification in phase two as well. So it's not just taking glutathione as a general antioxidant, but think about it also as being very specific to the liver and to that detox process. So if you can support glutathione, or in another case, one of the other molecules that gets conjugated is sulfate. Sulfation is another one of these things. You can also support yourself by looking at those mechanisms. How do I support the glutathione supply in the liver? How do I support the supply of sulfate in the body so it can be utilized for conjugation? And then, of course, last but not least, certainly is phase three, which is the elimination part. And so when designing a product, you also want to see, does this product also aid in the elimination? So does it stimulate the release of bile acids? Does it stimulate peristaltic contractions to allow for faster elimination through the body and the alimentary canal? And of course, with something like a fiber, for example, you're going to definitely get the effect of bulking and more frequent elimination from the body. So trying to put all of those pieces together into a product is really just a great idea. And if you can hit all of those little points, all the better. If you have to break it up into several products, which again is something we do, that's also very good. Everybody wants that magic pill. Everybody wants something that they can take in one shot. But if you can take them in a couple pills or three, or you have a liquid that you can take in adjunct to one pill or whatever you're taking, that is really still great, because again, you're supporting all of those processes in the body. And by doing that, you're really aiding that process of detoxification. So if you can prevent absorption at the very beginning, you can support those three phases in the liver of detoxification, and then you can support overall elimination from the body, then you're really essentially achieving all of your aims for detoxification.
And that all sounds great, but I'm sure with formulating a new product comes to its own set of challenges. So what are some of the biggest challenges you would say in sourcing detox ingredients that meet PRL's purity standards?
So I'd probably say the most challenging thing that we will see all the time, and anyone who really dives deep in this industry will see this. And I spoke about it earlier a little bit, and I didn't touch on it so much when I was discussing the chlorella, because you did ask a little bit about, how is our sourcing different, purity, things like that. It is incredibly important that when you are buying any sort of natural compound that is going to be used to support detoxification, that what you are buying is of the highest purity and the highest quality. Because if it's not incredibly pure, so say you wanted to buy glutathione,
okay, and
you didn't buy a pure glutathione, what is in there besides the glutathione? I mean, I can't answer that because it could be many different compounds. But if you bought something that was only 90% pure, for example, 10% of whatever you're taking into your body could be very toxic. It could be a remnant from the reaction process that synthesized the glutathione. So whatever they did in the industrial process to synthesize that glutathione, you may have bought something that still had a remnant from that reaction. You could have solvents still in there. And all of those are toxins. So why take in something to detox if you're going to also be introducing more toxins along with it? Yeah. And if you're looking at something like a very naturally derived product, so something like, say, just the whole herb form of turmeric or the whole herb form of milk thistle, those are often contaminated with heavy metals, and they're often contaminated with mycotoxins. So the PRL standard is to make sure that we are not buying anything with heavy metals or mycotoxins. But we are one of the few companies who really tests, especially for the mycotoxins. And as I said before, so many natural products now that you're buying, they're all contaminated with mycotoxins. It's very hard to find a source that has low or zero mycotoxins. We work very hard to find those, to make sure that we're sourcing something that doesn't contain aflatoxins. And by doing so, again, we're preventing what I had just mentioned, which is, why buy something for detox if it's going to include a very toxic chemical in it? And aflatoxins, especially aflatoxin B1, is a well-known carcinogen, and it specifically damages the liver. So why would you want to take something in that's going to damage your liver if you think what it's doing is helping the liver? So PRL holds an incredibly high standard when it comes to those natural products and any synthetics we may purchase, which we do keep to a minimum. But any natural products we buy, we understand, because that risk is there, that we have to test for those aflatoxins. We have to test for those other mycotoxins. We have to test for heavy metals. We have to make sure there's no other biological contamination in it either, because bacteria also will create toxic compounds that are dangerous. So we go through an entire, basically 20-step process to make sure that everything we're getting in is as clean as possible, so that when you're looking for something to detoxify, it's actually going to be able to do what it's supposed to do.
Yes, and that you can trust it, ultimately. From an R&D perspective, what signs or lab markers do you keep in mind when thinking about detox products, about detox support?
Well, so again, I think this goes back to the earlier discussion I had about the phases of detox and, sort of attributes we're looking at in various compounds. Are they antioxidant? So are they protecting and aiding in phase 1 and 2 detox? Do they help preserve the glutathione so that the body doesn't deplete the glutathione and not have it available for conjugation? Does it help with elimination? That is all a pretty standard host of questions we would ask when we're looking at something like that. It's incredibly interesting because as time goes on, we are seeing more and more attention now being paid to producing more bioavailable forms of natural products. So curcuminoids, for many years, essentially we can only get one type of curcumin extract, more or less. But with better science and greater technology comes the ability to not only be able to get a very specific host of curcuminoids. You're not just getting curcumin. You can get the hydrolyzed forms. You can get these, or I should say hydrated forms. You can get modified forms of curcuminoids that occur naturally in turmeric, but you can actually extract them in appreciable quantities. And some of these are a lot more useful and have actually a greater effect than just curcumin. But you can actually get these now extracted in appreciable quantities where you can apply them, and even in forms where they're better absorbed by the body. Curcumin famously has a very low bioavailability when taken orally. But there are new modern forms that essentially can bypass, if you will, the digestion and absorption in the stomach, and can instead be absorbed in the small intestine, because there are ways to modify how that's delivered. And then that essentially allows that curcumin to go directly into the hepatic portal vein to get to the liver and to essentially provide the antioxidant support that you're looking for.
Having said all that, what advice would you give to the practitioners building detox protocols with Purell products for the first time?
So, as I said before, you focus on what I would consider fundamentals to pharmacology and pharmacokinetics. You look at what your patient needs at the moment. So defining their level of toxification to understand how much detoxification they really need. Are they in need of essentially emergency and acute detoxification? Does this have to be something they need it right now, immediately high levels of detoxification compounds to go into the body to affect immediately? Or can they do something a little slower to get a slower detoxification effect? Obviously, the products that we offer essentially can be used for both. It could be used for acute. Obviously, there's nothing saying it couldn't. It can be used for chronic or long-term detox as well. It just sort of depends on how much detoxification the patient needs. So again, given that we offer a large variety of detoxification compounds, and again, we only mentioned a few of them here. I did throw in the fact that we have glutathione as well, and really, anyone who's in need of detoxification should be taking a supplemental glutathione. That's an absolute. You have to support the glutathione in the body because, again, if that's depleted, phase 2 detoxification becomes more difficult. So having that, certainly having our hepatoven, which is a very specific to the liver, it's a compound that's very specific to the liver and to support the liver, dosage dependent. If it's an acute phase, obviously you need to use a higher dose. But if you're doing something on the chronic or long-term spectrum, then you can take less of it, but take it over time for a longer period. Medi-clay, which is something that, again, you're talking in an acute phase, that's something you almost want to be taking daily, multiple times a day to make sure that you're getting proper binding of those toxins and elimination. Taking fiber, obviously, with that to supplement as well with the excretion. And, we didn't even talk about some of our products that we offer topically that detox as well. So those are our Medi series, Medi Body Pack, Medi Body Bath. Mm-hmm. We have a host of detox products. Practitioners, once they know what level of detox they have to take with their patient, are, very well knowledgeable customer service representatives and salespeople can always help too, to guide them along in how they want to create a protocol to follow to go ahead and treat their patient properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they'll appreciate the advice coming from you as well. On that note, are there any key mistakes you see when people approach detox, either in formulation or application?
So I think I'll say make two major points on this topic. So one, which is probably the most general problem that I see, is the idea that a single round of drinking a green smoothie, mm-hmm. You drink 4 green smoothies for a week, is going to detox. That kind of thinking is, it's partially antiquated, but it also just is not scientifically sound. Yes, if you drink green compounds, you drink, kale smoothies, for example, yes, you'll get vitamin C, you'll get vitamin A, you'll get vitamin K, which, they support detoxification because they're useful to the liver during detoxification. You'll get chlorophyll, which also is supportive, but there's no additional support coming from that for detoxification. So if you just drink those smoothies, but you continue being exposed to the same toxins that you're being exposed to on a daily basis, it's essentially not going to do almost any good at all. You need those extra boosters in there. Again, you need supplemental glutathione. You need something like milk thistle to help repair that damage on the back end. You need something to help you eliminate. You need something like a clay to bind to other toxins. And again, going right back to the second point I was going to make, which goes back to a point I made earlier about everything being contaminated in our food supply. Those kale smoothies might be contaminated themselves with a lot of toxins. So if you're just going to be drinking the kale smoothie, you better hope that kale is essentially completely free of any environmental toxins. Make sure that it was grown in water that did not have microorganisms that are dangerous. Make sure that it has no heavy metals in the soil that it absorbed. I can go on through a whole list here. And I think that to me is the biggest problem. People are just getting caught up in TikTok fads or Instagram fads, something where somebody posts, I drank this shake and I drank it for 5 days and all of a sudden my liver enzymes decreased. Well, as we always say in engineering, we say correlation does not imply causation. So again, it may have been sheer luck that your liver enzymes decreased, but you happen to be drinking the shake during those days and you attribute that effect to the drinking of the shake. Know the science. If you don't know the science, go see a practitioner. Go see a practitioner who knows the science. They can diagnose you. They can help evaluate what sort of toxicity you have, and they can help you develop a protocol for treating that toxicity. And I think that that's really something that we have kind of lost track of in the last maybe decade or so with social media, is we've lost track of this idea that you can go talk to an expert. You can go talk to someone who's qualified. You don't have to watch Dr. Google tell you exactly what to do. You can go talk to somebody and they can help you through this and give you the guidance you really need.
There you have it. Add those boosters to those smoothies.
And that's what PRL is here to do. We're here to support those knowledgeable practitioners who are trying to help those people who, otherwise may have to resort to Google or TikTok.
That's what we're here for.
It is what we're here for.
We did touch on this earlier, and I was going to get to this question. So what excites you most about the future of detox supplementation at PRL? Are there new frontiers or innovations ahead? New products, possibly?
So yes, there actually is on the horizon some new products to support detoxification. I sort of mentioned one a little earlier, and I don't want to give away the ghost on this, so I'm keeping these close to the vest. But just as little drops to get people excited and maybe inquire a bit, working diligently on a very high potency fiber product. And this would be a multifaceted fiber product. So essentially it would be including soluble, insoluble fibers. It would provide a prebiotic support, obviously provide support for elimination. Very, very interesting one that we're looking at. And again, I don't want to say too much, but we're looking in the next couple of months to launch that one. And then a very comprehensive detox protocol, several new products to be launched to support specifically the 3 phases of detoxification. So again, we are very happy with the results we've seen so far, and we are going to be looking for launch of these new products most likely before the end of the year. So this is very exciting for us.
Exciting.
And obviously,
looking forward to that.
And supporting detoxification is something that we've done historically well, and we want to continue to be thought leaders in that area.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan. That wraps up today's Premier Living podcast. Huge thank you to Nathan Dodge for sharing the science and intention behind our detox formulations.
Between the stress at the office and juggling my kids' soccer schedule, my energy was running on empty. Then I found Premier Research Labs, and they've been trusted by health practitioners for more than 35 years. Now I have the energy I had 10 years ago. I'm finally sleeping through the night, and with their digestive support, I've even shed a few pounds. Plus, Premier Research Labs products are made in the U.S. with top quality natural ingredients and cutting-edge science. I found them on Amazon, but you can learn more about them if you visit prlabs.com today and start your journey to feeling your best.